going here, and away we go. Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is another training video. This one, as you see, deals with critical thinking and the Socratic approach. We use both of these terms frequently in the lab, and ideally, we use both of these concepts in the lab most every consultation. But when you say something so often, Socratic approach, critical thinking, the meanings can get a little blurry. And so I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I want to give you some information that might be useful as you employ critical thinking and the Socratic approach. So, this is Socrates, or if you're a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure fan, it's Socrates because that's how they said it. If you don't know what that is, there's a new Bill and Ted movie out. I haven't seen it. The first one was funny, but it's not for everybody. But nonetheless, Socrates here is the father of modern education. And he started out by working for the ruler of Greece, Philip of Macedonia. And so he taught Philip's son, who was Alexander the Great. And this is sort of the method that he used. Of course, Socrates then taught Plato, and Plato taught Aristotle, and so on and so forth. So when we think about what we do with his particular approach, it goes back to the ancient Greeks and it still works today, like many of the things they did. So, what we're going to cover today specifically is going to be the Socratic approach, critical thinking, then goals of using critical thinking questions while you're employing the Socratic approach or Socratic method, conversational versus conventional approaches, and I'll explain what that means, but it's sort of what to do if the Socratic approach isn't working. And then we'll go over some questions, some examples of questions that you can use to forward the Socratic approach process. Really, they're critical thinking questions that will push forward your question asking. So, first thing here, what is the Socratic approach in comparison with traditional tutoring? So, at the lab, you probably know that we don't like the word tutor very much. We would prefer something like a consultant because people who have consultants are important people doing important things. And that's what our clients are. That's what students at Grand Valley are. And one thing that we do differently than most tutoring centers is employ the Socratic method. Now, I know I said that this was, sort of the way we learn now, and for many folks it is. But traditional tutoring was designed to help students with one subject or one assignment. And that's not what we do. I get it. We do have folks come in. I'm going to work on my persuasive speech, the first one for COM 201. Yes, in that way we do work on specific assignments. But here's the difference. The skills that our clients gain from learning how to give an effective presentation for that class can be applied elsewhere, right? Whenever they give a presentation, if we do our jobs well and they pay attention, they can then pull that information out somewhere in the future and give a presentation in another class at work, wherever they may be. Whereas traditional tutoring would teach you maybe how to do, I don't know, like a calculus equation, but that's tough to apply anywhere else that you're not doing calculus. So again, I'm not saying that the other side or the other approach isn't useful. It is. I've used it for statistics, but we're different, and the Socratic approach sets us apart. And so let's look at the three items that they really say on this infographic, anyway, that define the Socratic approach or method. First, offer questions in place of answers. I hope you know this now by this point in the training, but you shouldn't be answering more questions than you ask, at least. So ask more questions. If someone asks you, is this a good attention getter? I don't want you to play a riddle game with them, be like, oh, well, I don't know, is it? But you can phrase your questions in a way that will make them evaluate the quality of that attention getter on their own, and you can guide them through that, and they'll never know that's what you're doing if you do it really well. We'll talk about examples of that shortly, but it's focused on use of questions. Then the purple circle refuses to give students the answer directly, and that's what we should be doing as well for the most part. We'll get to the exceptions, but if a student comes in and they say, what should my third main point be? If they're using Monroe's, you could say, well, what's the fourth step of Monroe's? Because if your body's going to have the problem, solution, and visualization, then I guess it would be visualization, right? Yeah, it would be. So again, you want to get them to learn while they're there and while we're answering their questions, even if that's with a question. The last item here is that there's never one correct answer unless all other solutions have been ruled out. And for speech writing and speech crafting, that's a very true statement. So there is no perfect speech, perfect attention getter, perfect phrasing of something. There are effective and ineffective, and very effective or very ineffective approaches, but that doesn't mean that one way is better than another when these sort of styles are really close to the same. So, for example, again, with the attention getter, if the student says, should I use a story here for my attention getter? It's fine to say, that's one option, but there are others. What do you know what the other options are? I know we can do a statistic or a quotation. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you can do those. So now you've got a statistic, a quotation. You might even add in the question asking with hands raising, and you've got a story. So now you've got four. Which one, if you were an audience member, do you think would be the most attention grabbing for you? And then they're going to answer. And then I think we just found the answer to their original question. We did that through asking questions with, adding a little bit of information along the way so that we could guide them to finding their right answer. Now, when we think about the Socratic approach and how we use it to teach and to learn, here's some stuff that it's just key to know. Again, we've talked about being centered on asking questions, but notice the next two lines. You should ask leading questions, but you shouldn't lead the conversation, because at the end of the day, the next item, it's their speech. So we can give them our advice. But what's better is if they give themselves their own advice that's well thought through. And that's what we do. We help them think through an evaluation of what they're already doing. Now, that doesn't always work, as again, I've mentioned and I'll come back to. Sometimes, we'll have to give them very direct advice. And we have to kind of break the Socratic approach. But then again, it's still their speech. So we could give them our best shot and advise them that the best way is this and this, and when the speech is theirs at the end, they may say, yeah, that's good advice, but I'm just going to do it my way, so now it's that and that, right? It's completely different. But in terms of asking these questions versus giving that kind of advice, try running about like a 3-to-1 ratio. So for every 3 questions you ask, you might give one statement. There doesn't have to be a science to that, but it's just sort of an idea. Now, if you're running out of questions and you're thinking, okay, what question should I ask next, or how can I make this work? Well, we can go to the next slide here and we can talk about sort of different ways you might handle this. So, first of all, this is the exceptions slide. So, if you are using the Socratic method, Socratic approach, and it doesn't seem to be working, they're just not getting it, they're not answering the questions, give them time to answer, right? Learn to embrace the silence for a few moments. But if it's just not working, those are unique situations. 90+% of the time, the Socratic approach will work. But sometimes that might not work, and that's going to be on a client by client assessment. It's not accurate to say all people like this won't work for, but all people like that it will work for. That's not the case. However, there are some particular types of folks that it might not work for as well as others. One there is those who are on the autism spectrum, and you see the note there, some, not all people. But some folks with autism, for example, are very literal. So, if you ask them questions, they may give you the answer, but they may not see the connection between their question and their answer to your question, which inadvertently should answer their original question. That might be sort of two separate things for those folks. Just like we need to be very careful with our use of slang or even like colloquialisms, like you should throw your hat in the ring, like get involved, take a chance. I used that once. It's why I have that example with a student who was on the spectrum, and he asked me seriously. He said, "I need a hat for this now," because he was sort of getting a little fed up with not grasping what he was doing. Turned out to be a very good speaker, and everything was fine. But be aware that we will have these unique situations. This could also be the case with ESL students. Now, again, this is some, not all, but if folks have a really tough time understanding English, sorry for the loud noise. My dad's here, I guess. My dogs are barking. But if someone's having a tough time understanding English, then you asking them questions is just more cognitive loading. In other words, it makes their minds have to do more work just to continue the conversation than it does to actually, make sense of what you're saying and connect it all together. If they're thinking in a different language. So, with those folks, you might give it a shot, but bail out quick if it doesn't work. Or if you just get the vibe that this isn't going to happen, try a different approach. Last here is what I call high density students. This just means they're dense. Like it's hard to get through. So if you ask them a question and they give you an answer, what do you think would get your attention the best? I don't know. Well, I mean, you've heard speeches before, so what kind of attention getter did they use that makes it memorable? I don't remember. So I guess they've all just been terrible speeches. No, but you don't remember any. See, we're wasting time at that point. So give it a couple shots and then move on to a different approach. What does that look like? Well, it's this conversation versus conventional. Conversational is much more of the Socratic, right? So, well, tell me about a time when you did this thing, or if it were you in the situation, or imagine this setting. Now, here's what's happening. What do you think about it? That's conversational, but conventional is more the traditional tutoring. So, okay, so here's your attention getter. I think you should use a story or asking questions. Do you have a preference? I mean, that's sometimes what you have to do. When you think about critical thinking, it's important that we again know what that means and we don't just say that term. For me, all of these sort of references go back to critical thinking, seeing the big picture. So, you're not just focused on this narrow little area. You're really broadening your view. Maybe you're broadening it because you're at the 30,000 foot view. If you've ever been on an airplane, you look down, everything looks small and you can see divisions and, it's really an experience. And to view their presentation that way, the client's presentation, and help them get there, will let them see, oh man, maybe I'm too focused on one thing. Thinking 3 moves ahead. So this would be a good tactic to consider if you are maybe thinking about the devil's advocate. So if you have a student with a controversial topic and you know that the room is not going to agree for the most part, then you might think 3 moves ahead and say things like, so if this audience were to ask you this question, what would you say? So now we're 1 move ahead. Now, when you're speaking and you think they're going to ask you that, right? So how can you sort of refute it within your speech before they ever get the chance to ask? Now we're 2 moves ahead. Now, is it really worth including, or how do you want to maybe phrase it so that you can refute it and make them feel good about you refuting it, even though they think that you're wrong somehow? In that moment, they may see it as, maybe I should refute that too. Maybe that's not a bad idea. Now you're 3 steps ahead. And you don't have to always be 3 steps ahead, but the idea there is that we are pulling them up so they can see this broader setting and try to get them to evaluate it and to think ahead so that they're doing the best job they can. The next one here, the other side of the coin. So with this one, think about it like if you have a student who just isn't quite getting anything useful out of their speech. And what I mean by that is you've got the student, I had one today, student comes to meet with me here, and they're talking about marijuana laws, and they get to the third main point. It's visualization because it's Monroe's, and with this one, it's sort of like, what does this even mean? What can I do here? And my expression to them was, it's a mirror. It's the flip of the problem, right? Because if you have a problem, the United States has different laws in different states about marijuana. Specifically, that's a problem because it confuses people and it makes this sort of unequal administering of the law. Great. So now, if you fix that problem, then what we should be able to see is the other side of the coin and show them that the visualization is just, look, I fixed this problem. So now people aren't confused when they travel state to state, and we have a much more equal justice system because everybody is treated the same. It's just flipping it over. And the other one is, you can't see the forest for the trees. This picture here is very dense, and it might look like we're in the middle of a jungle, and we're going to be in these trees for days, or we might die here. But then, if you broaden out, you might see the end is just right up the hill here. We just need to keep moving. So anything that you can do to sort of let them see the big picture is going to be helpful. If any of those phrases work for you, feel free to use them. If you don't like them, don't use them. It's all good. But the key thing, critical thinking sees the bigger picture. Now, when you're thinking about asking specific critical thinking questions that will go with the Socratic approach, ask these kinds of questions: the who's, what's, when's, where's, why's, and how's. And let's look at some examples of that. So the who, do you get that? Okay, because if you don't, it's not funny, but I thought it was funny. So the who does this impact? Who does the impact? Who does this impact? Whatever it is, right? This could be anything. This could be the marijuana laws. This could be assault on college campuses. This could be free college. This could be, you name it. Who does it impact? Who needs to hear this? Who is causing this to happen, either the problem or the change? Who supports or opposes this problem or change? And then who started the process, whatever process is involved? The what questions. What? No, maybe. Okay. What is happening here? Like, just describe it for me, please. Like, give me the details. What started this whole thing? Was there an event that really kicked this off? What is the goal here in this situation? What are we looking for as an outcome? What's the purpose of whatever we're doing? What did they, maybe you, the speaker, or the audience, hope to gain from the situation, the change? What can we do to help get your plan going? And then what will this do to whatever, right? So if they're talking about marijuana laws, what will this do to people who are already incarcerated for marijuana crimes? Or if you're talking about assaults on college campuses, what will this do to students who have filed cases with their university but didn't go to the police, back then? Would they have a chance to bring their case back up? It could be anything, literally. So get through the who's and then maybe move to the what's if you're having trouble. Maybe the when questions are more important for you. So when did this start? When was this in history? Again, showing context. Because if you say something like, a person was turned away from a job because of their ethnicity, 2021, we're like, oh my God, you can't do that. That's illegal. It's illegal. But if this was, 1903 in New York, we would say, well, yeah, a lot of people were. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just understanding when it took place for context. When did things change, if they have? When did you hear about this? Like, what made you want to choose this? Because apparently it stuck with you. So when did you first hear about it? And when does it end? Like whatever it is that's going on, is it a process? Is it a series of events? When does it end? Other questions? Where? Again, okay. Where is this happening? Where did it start? Where is this legal, illegal? Where can you go to learn more about this? Where is the opposition? Where are the supporters? Now, if questions like that, where is the opposition to this? Let's say that it is making marijuana legal across the country. So if I said, where is the opposition to this? You might say metaphorically, like, oh, they're on the conservative side of the political spectrum. That's accurate. You may also say, where is the opposition to this? In the United States, well, most of the opposition is in southern states and some of the Midwestern Great Plains areas. That's a physical location. It still answers the question. Again, it's their speech, it's their answers, but these are questions that you can ask. Why questions are also obviously important. Why is this happening? Why is this a good or a bad thing? Why is it important to you, the speaker? Why does it matter to the audience? Why does it have to be this way, or does it? And why did this begin? Why doesn't someone do something about it? Again, just ideas for these kinds of why questions. Last type might be the how questions. So, how does this work? If it's a process, we need steps. How can we stop it if that's what we want to do? How can we get involved? How are you going to whatever, right? Whatever they're proposing. How are you going to change the federal law? Hopefully that's in the plan, but if not, they need to be able to answer that. This is a good example too. So if you have like the marijuana speech and their solution is to change the federal laws on marijuana, then you might not just say, well, how are you going to change the law? And they'll say something like, Congress will pass a bill to the Senate will pass it to the president, and Joe Biden will sign it. Yeah, that's all true. How do you get it to the House floor? They don't need to know all these details, but how are you going to get that bill just to be paid attention to? First of all, they need to be able to come up with something. They could say, well, it already is part of their attention. This is being talked about recently, or I'm going to sign a petition and get a petition going. I'm going to have an advertising campaign, whatever they want to do, but they need something. How should they feel about this? How does this keep happening? Shootings. And how should we respond? Again, how should the audience respond? How should anyone respond? So again, these are examples only. You won't use all of these ever, but they're out there. If you really get stuck, you might think about, what can I ask next? Who, what, when, why, how, that kind of thing. So we talked about the Socratic approach in that, this is sort of the ancient yet really the key of modern education. We talked about critical thinking and what that means in terms of our services, getting them to see the bigger picture, or how things fit together within their outline or their speech. We talked about the goal of using critical thinking questions is really so that we can keep the Socratic approach going. There are exceptions, and that is this idea of conversational versus conventional. Sometimes we have to cross that boundary and just give advice pretty forward, like we were tutors in a tutoring center as opposed to consultants. And then again, all those types of questions that we just covered might be helpful to you. So, Socrates, he'd be proud of us, I imagine, but I don't know if you're like up on your Greek history. Some people don't even think he really existed, but maybe we'll never know. But we do know that the approach exists, the method exists. So let's make sure we're using it. And really, I think you'll see that this benefits the students more because they're thinking through their own questions and getting to an answer. And it benefits you more because it takes the pressure away from you having to know everything, which you don't. And it shares it with the student at this point. So it's a good thing for everyone. It's a win-win. If you have questions on how to use this or need examples of it or whatever it might be, let me know and we'll do that. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.